Hi, this is Jennifer Patrick, and I am going to talk about my formal observation number 2. This is my supplementary recording. And first thing I want to talk about is what changes did you make to your lesson after meeting with your field supervisor? So my field supervisor recommended, excuse me, that I add some more questions to my discussion, which I did. So I highlighted those. She also recommended that I fix my APA citations, so I updated that. Some other suggestions were I did a couple of things. I moved my sort as part of that independent slash assessment, so I did that, and I also did the bookmark. So my next thing that I'm going to discuss is what extensions would you do with this, what extensions you would do with the students after the lesson. So some extensions that I would do would be to read some more books, maybe highlight some more books that had to do with fiction and nonfiction, and then students could, see themselves more in the books, and also they could identify different nonfiction text features. That could be a way to move into studying about nonfiction. I could also talk about fiction and the different elements of fiction, how we have our characters, our problem, our solution. And in the classroom, that could be really helpful because that covers, ELAR, that would cover books and all of that. I also would have the students check each other's things and explain why. When I had them do the sorting activity, some of the titles were a little bit tricky, and I did that on purpose. And so I would explain to them, or I would have them explain why. Discuss what you thought went particularly well with my lesson. So I had a group of about probably 9 kids, and they did such a good job at responding to the questions that I gave them. They were active participants. I was very impressed with their knowledge of the library, being familiar with different sections. They did a really great job of being able to explain why something was a fiction and a nonfiction. I thought the participation went really well. I was pleased with sorting of the books, and then I would put the book in the correct category on the chart paper. The students were a little bit stumped by a couple of the books, so I was able to ask a follow-up question and ask, so how could we know for sure if this is a fiction or a nonfiction? What can we do? And they were very responsive to that. They recommended opening the book, and we had to do a little reading. We had to do a little searching to find out and figure out why something was a particular book, and discuss things that are magic. If animals were talking, what was the particular reason? I also enjoyed the sort of the books, the fiction and the nonfiction books. I had enough for everybody, but some kids wanted to do them together, which I encouraged. I was able to walk around and ask them again, specifically, why do you think this? Some of the titles were tricky, as I said, and I encouraged them. The pictures were kind of small, and some of them, my printer kind of discolored some of the pictures. I tried to hold on to those for myself, but theirs were a better quality. But they were able to look at the pictures and not base it just on the picture, but then they had to actually read the title to know why something was a fiction or a nonfiction. Sometimes the cover would have not necessarily cartoon drawn characters, but characters that were not pictures or photographs. And one of them in particular was the Hidden Figures book, the women that were involved in some of the space mission things. And some of them originally put that into the fiction book because of the way the cover looked. There was another book that was called, I think it was What's in a Bird's Nest. And that one got some of them too because the cover was just kind of light and fluffy and kind of a fun cover. But then I read the title to them, and then they realized, oh, this is a nonfiction book. So they very quickly adjusted to that. Something else that I thought went well was the bookmarks. I was impressed with their enthusiasm for wanting to color. There was a little girl that said, well, I like both. What do I do? I like fiction books and I like nonfiction books. So I gave the suggestion of, well, why don't you do something nonfiction on one side and fiction on the other? And she ultimately she decided she was just going to do the nonfiction or the fiction, excuse me. But it was nice to have an answer for her to give her that choice. I thought that they spent time on it. One of the siblings of one of the older kids, she was young, probably 3, I think. And her sister did a great job of encouraging her, hey, just draw some color on your page. And that will show me that you like coloring books. And I thought that was a really great way to bring that down to lower elementary, pre-K, stuff like that. That was a really great way that sibling was able to help out because that could be a very frustrating thing for that young of a child. But the sibling was able to really help her out. And I appreciated that. What changes would I make to my lesson before presenting it again? One of the books, the nonfiction book, the one I read about recycling, was just an online book. I wish I had had a paper copy, but I just didn't. I liked the book. I thought it was quick to read. I thought it covered some really great things. We had some great discussions. I wish I just had a paper book. I like paper books much better, obviously. They're just easier to navigate. And then at the end with the extension, I was going to read Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, and the kids just wanted to listen to it on the computer. And that's one also that I could have pulled from the library and I could have read that one. So that's something that I would have done differently. The kids were really into the books that I was reading. The very first book, The Day Before You Begin, or The Day You Begin, excuse me, was a great book. It was, the first thing I did out of the gate. Some of the younger ones got a little squirrely, and I can't blame them. It was kind of a longer book for starting the lesson that way. But I thought the book was really great. Some of the girls in my group were able to recognize that, people are different, just like books can be a little bit different, but also we can find the commonalities. And I thought that was really insightful that little girl recognized that. And I thought she was really in tune. So the next question is, what was different about creating this library lesson as compared to other lessons you've created as a teacher? I was in the classroom for a really long time, over 20 years. And what I would do is I would find a book, or I would find an activity and then find a book that would go along with that. This was different because I had something in the library that I wanted to make sure that the kids understood. So it was understanding and being able to recognize differences in the types of books. Whereas in the classroom, maybe we just would have highlighted, I just would have read a fiction book, but not compared it to a nonfiction book. or I just would have read a nonfiction book and talked about the different things to highlight in that nonfiction book. Um, I think that I involved a lot more books. If I were in the classroom, I maybe just would have shown pictures of books, but when I was doing the sorting with the learning, or the love and the learning and the fiction and the nonfiction, I brought the actual book, which was really great. I was really glad that I did that because, again, like I said just earlier, some of the covers of the books weren't immediately known to the kids to say, okay, this is a fiction book or this is a nonfiction book. Some of them were a little bit tricky. And so it was really good to flip through the books, to actually have the books. And in the classroom, I might not have had the book. Other things that I thought was different about creating this lesson as a librarian is that I was able to directly connect it to the library. I was able to talk about the different sections, and I wouldn't have done that in the classroom. In the classroom, I did have fiction and nonfiction sections, but I wouldn't have highlighted that. Now, if I was in an actual library, like I am in the school year, I would have shown them those sections. We would have talked about like where the adventure books were, where the animal books were. So I would have taken that a little bit deeper, but I wasn't in the library, so I wasn't able to do that. But that's definitely something that I would have done different. And the last question is as you were creating this lesson, what other ideas for similar and different lessons did you have? So for similar lessons, I liked being able to, or I like the thought of taking a nonfiction book and pulling out different text features. I talked about that a little bit ago. But kids love nonfiction books. Sometimes they tend to go to those before they'll grab a fiction book. And nonfiction readers can read the book. It doesn't have to be necessarily be in a particular order. It doesn't have to be this or that. But just highlighting certain points so that kids are familiar instead of just kind of glossing over things. I've also noticed that sometimes when kids are reading nonfiction books, and this is when I taught second grade, when they were reading nonfiction books, sometimes they wouldn't think that the stuff in the margins or the quick tip or whatever was significant or important, but it really is. It's part of the learning of a nonfiction book. And so I thought that would be really important to highlight. And other ideas that I have for different lessons is, like I said, maybe going through the library and highlighting different sections of the library. So, and this is something that gave me the idea so that I can do this at the beginning of next year. I think I took for granted the older kids. I just kind of felt like they knew where things were because they'd been in the library. But our library is large and it's kind of an overwhelming place. The nonfiction section is very big. It has, 5,000 or 6,000 books. And I think that can be really intimidating. So if I were able to do a different lesson and maybe specifically take the kids to the library, point out the different sections, let them know that, don't just say like, go to the zeros, go to the 500s if you want to look for this, or go to the 700s for this, but really teach them the fundamentals of what the nonfiction section is and what it looks like in a library. I think that would be really helpful. I loved doing this lesson with the kids because I really felt like they were active participants. I liked putting the lesson together. I think that the things that went well, just one last plug for that, the things that went well are the participation. And I especially liked the involvement that the kids had. I appreciate you watching and look forward to your feedback. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.